Hey, Drinking Buddies. This is the second episode of the Drinking Buddies Show. I'm your host, Frank Rodgers. In this episode, I'm excited to introduce Greg Beck, sake sommelier, go through his backstory, and dig into why he's the accidental sake expert. If you like this show, be sure to subscribe and share it with a buddy. Let's get started. My pleasure today to introduce Greg Beck, sake sommelier. We wanted to focus on what made Greg the man he is today. So, Greg, introduce yourself.
Well, you already introduced me.
No, more.
But it's a pleasure to be here in my own house. Thank you for coming.
Yes.
Yeah, I've become an accidental expert in sake, and I've been homebrewing beer and cider and other experiments in kombucha and Japanese plum wine and other fermented experiments for about 7 years, a little more than 7 years now. Just kind of took a circuitous route to get here, but that also introduced me to you. So
that's right.
Very happy to be doing this with you.
Excellent. Me too. But let's take it all the way back to Tucson.
Yeah, I am from Tucson, Arizona, and my family moved around a lot when I was a kid. So I ended up spending the first half of my childhood in the Inland Empire here in Southern California. And I moved back with my family to Arizona when I was 12. So I did middle school, high school, and university all in Tucson. Graduated from University of Arizona in 2006, bear down. Just before graduating, I met you in Japan on our Year in Japan program.
That's right. But even before you went to Japan, you got interested in Japanese culture and the language especially. Why don't you tell us a little bit how you got into it?
Yeah, Japan was a total curveball. In high school, I thought I'd be an architect. I really enjoyed learning German because I had an outstanding German teacher. Shout out to Frau Duisberg. In college, I was really disappointed with the German professor I had just on day one. I took my very first German class in college, which I had tested into a 300 level German class. I asked her a question at the end of class, and she was not a native German speaker to begin with. And her answer was something along the lines of, that's just the way it is, and you'll have to get used to it. And I was like, oh, this is not Frau Duisberg level.
No.
German explanations. So I dropped that, and when I went to sign up for languages the next year, I saw Japanese was available. Then the second semester was a very difficult language to start studying. Somebody suggested a study abroad program. The rest, as they say, is history.
You saw the Japanese was available, but had you had any exposure, either growing up in the Inland Empire in Arizona, to any sort of Japanese culture?
Like a lot of high school kids, I got into anime through like Toonami. Yeah, just friends who were buying like bootleg DVDs off of eBay.
Oh, yeah, back in those days, you couldn't get anything.
Back when eBay was new.
Yeah, but it's also, I think, maybe for a really young listener, they wouldn't realize how difficult it was to get much Japanese anything in the US at that point.
Yeah, there was one Japanese restaurant that wasn't sushi in all of Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah,
which is a city of I think at the time about 1 million population.
Yeah,
there was one actual Japanese restaurant that wasn't doing sushi.
Right.
Napster had just become a thing back in these days. But I should also mention, like, that was in high school.
Yeah.
And in high school, the anime I was watching was all in English.
Yeah.
And all I liked were the stories and the characters and the drawing styles. The language hadn't even set in until I started watching old black and white Kurosawa films that were dubbed. And I heard these samurai speaking Japanese, and I thought, oh, Japanese sounds cool, you know? And then you would see in a lot of the animation some of the writing. And it's like, oh, the language looks cool, like the alphabets and the the Chinese characters. So the kind of seed of interest was there, and then once I went to University of Arizona and saw the classes available, that's when all those things came to a intersection, and I took the dive, took the plunge.
So did you take a class before you studied abroad, or was it just straight?
I took 2 semesters, 101 and 102.
Yeah.
And spoke very little Japanese when I met you.
Right.
I don't know if you even remember.
Oh, yeah, no, I remember because we had the different classes.
You were in C?
I was in C, yeah.
Yeah, you were in the 3rd level of 5.
Yeah.
Based on our ability, based on our placement ability. No, you were way better. I was in the very bottom class. I think the difference is I caught up. Right. After I would say it took me about 4 months to catch up, though.
Yeah, I think all of us. Well, to back it up, there were 41 of us.
Yeah,
about 41 of us from all around the world. Actually, I was surprised there were people that weren't even from the English-speaking world. We had a French student. We had yes, but we had a good mix of students, and so. Yeah, we all started off at different levels, but as soon as we got into Japan, I mean, everybody's Japanese accelerated very rapidly.
Immersion is key. Immersion is huge.
Yeah, and I think so. What did you get the most out of your experience? You know, we land in Japan.
Alcohol poisoning.
Lots of.
No, I mean, for me, that year studying abroad, for both of us, I think, made us conversationally fluent in Japanese. Which is the biggest thing I got out of it, maybe. But also the classes that we took in English in the afternoons about Japanese culture really had a strong impact on me in terms of my curiosity about the culture and the history.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, all joking aside, the drinking culture was a big thing to me. And this was my 2nd time being outside of America. The first time being my summer study abroad in Germany when I was 17. Mm-hmm. And no coincidence, I was, as a 17-year-old, acutely aware that I could drink being in Germany.
Right.
And being very excited about that. Same in Japan. We went on this program right after I turned 20. And the age to drink in Japan is 20.
Right.
So as soon as I stepped off the plane, I was suddenly of drinking age. For the 2nd time in my life without ever turning 21. It was an exciting kind of like early access
it's true.
to the world of alcohol. And I definitely, you know, had my fun and my childhood or my childish experimentation phase started early. But I also, you know, took to it with the same sort of studious nature that I had for every other aspect of Japanese culture and language.
Yeah, I still remember we went to Matsuyama and we had that drinking party. The college students there prepared for us. It was just so funny because I don't think any of us were ready for it. Like we didn't really know it was coming because we just weren't familiar with Japanese culture at that point, really. Like none of us had gone to a Japanese drinking party like that. So they bring us into a room. And they're like, all right, it's basically drinking time. And I think that was the first time that I had really had an amazing time hanging out with all these people, drinking, having it like so much fun. It wasn't like a high school party where, you know, people are just drinking to get drunk and experimenting stuff. But it was like a genuine adult fun event. And I remember like, I still have a bunch of fun pictures from it. We were all just like hanging out with them, getting to know them. And so I don't think I'll ever forget that because it was like, this is Japanese culture. This is how we like to party. This is how we like to get to know each other. And I'm like, I'm 100% for this.
Oh, man, we got to compare those pictures.
So you basically got early access to drinking culture and in a way that wasn't like hiding out at your stepmom's house in the basement drinking. Like you're really getting experience and seeing it. So we finish up our year in Japan, and you head back to the U.S. What's next?
Well, I very quickly visited you over at the University of Hawaii when I was on spring break. And just wrapped up my degree as quickly as possible. I figured out that I could switch from an English major to a Japanese major and graduate on time, even though we had spent that year in Japan. So I got out as quickly as possible. We had heard about the JET program through some people we met in our study in Japan. So I applied for that and went right back to Japan, but living in Hiroshima this time. And
for people that might not be familiar with it, what is the JET program?
Yeah, so I'm actually the co-president currently of a nonprofit alumni association for the JET program, Southern California and Arizona chapter. So I'm very happy to talk about that too. JET stands for Japan Exchange and Teaching. It is an opportunity for college graduates of native English-speaking backgrounds to go work in Japan as a civil servant. And the majority of those jobs are offered through local governments with their Board of Educations. And once you're employed by a Japanese Board of Education, they send you to schools to help teach English, usually as an assistant to a Japanese person who is an English teacher. So that job is an ALT. And there's another job for people who are more proficient in Japanese called Coordinator of International Relations. And there's a third job as well that's a sports exchange.
Oh, I remember.
Something. Yeah. It's SEAC.
And I think that's more like people that were like college athletes and things like that, right? Like they have
it's people that have like strong coaching and athletic education ability already or know-how already.
Yeah.
So that's probably actually the hardest one to get, and there are fewer positions, and it's more international in terms of you don't necessarily have to come from an English-speaking country to do that one. But and there are also non-English-speaking CIRs as well. The Coordinator of International Relations can come from China or Korea or France or the Netherlands. It just depends on whatever that local government's needs are. But that's all through the JET program. And because I got into that straight out of college and moved right back to Hiroshima, I ended up staying there for 5 years and started as an English teacher and was able to actually transfer to the Coordinator of International Relations part of the way through. And as part of Hiroshima's orientation for new JET program participants, we would do a 1-week camp in a part of the broader Hiroshima prefecture or state called Saijo. And we did like a 1-week intensive survival Japanese camp, which of course for me was more like welcome back to Japan party time because I was already conversationally fluent. So there wasn't a lot of work for me that needed to get done during that week. So what I discovered that during that time was that area called Saijo is one of the 3 oldest sake brewing cities in all of Japan.
So then we go to a couple of festivals.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So every October they have a sake matsuri or a
festival.
Yeah. Japanese sake festival where all of the sake makers from all over the country converge, and it's a all-you-can-drink, basically taste testing.
Right. Like a food and wine festival, but for sake.
Yeah, but just sake and literally hundreds of kinds. And you could, as I have several times, attend both days and never drink the same sake twice and definitely not be able to try all of them because of alcohol's effects on the body.
And remind me, what time does that start? It was like 10 in the morning, or it started fairly early.
I think it started at 10 a.m. on Saturday and 11 or 12 on Sunday. And the rest of the town where all these sake breweries existed year-round would also open their doors and give tours. So I would generally get there around 9 or 10 in the morning and do some brewery tours and see how sake was made and, get a little free taste test or something from the local brewery. and enjoy like the whole city's festival atmosphere. And, they have the food stalls called yatai.
So would you say it's kind of like almost a Japanese version of Oktoberfest in a way?
Yeah, I would absolutely compare that to Oktoberfest, although I haven't gotten to go to Munich yet. But the long and short of that is when I would get to the actual line to get into the park where all of the sake tasting is going on, it'd be about 11 a.m. or noon, and they would literally already be hauling people out on stretchers. Japanese people who got a little too carried away too quickly would be being taken out on stretchers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a good time. I mean, that wasn't like the majority of the people. That's just a couple of people.
Yeah.
I mean, the overall atmosphere is very fun.
Yeah, it's super festive. Everyone brings a tarp
Right.
and food, and you can also come and go, and you can buy food outside or inside the venue.
Right.
So it's basically an all-day picnic plus all you can drink sake.
So basically, you're inside, Joe. You're going to the festival. You already had your exchange student experience. So then you have to head home after that. What do you do next?
So that was a great question I was asking myself at that time. And I had considered going to South America to study Spanish the same way. And just during the job hunting katsudo, I'm like Japan thinking it. During my job hunting, exercises or whatever, I ended up finding employment with a Japanese television network as a journalist in New York City, which seemed like enough of a exciting adventure for my next step that I would end up moving to New York and living there for 5 years, close to 5 years, and working during that time as a journalist for TBS, Tokyo Broadcasting System. Yeah, I mean, I never stopped being interested in Japanese traditional spirits and alcohol. But I also, being back in America, which unlike Japan, it's completely legal to homebrew in America. So being back in New York City, I started homebrewing at that point in my kitchen in a tiny apartment.
Yeah. What was the first thing you made?
Black IPA.
Black IPA?
Yeah. The reason I got into homebrewing was and is that there are so many styles of craft beer that and there are just a few that kind of dominate the market demand. I think anybody can tell you what an IPA is at this point.
Right. Everybody's got one.
And yeah, and even breweries that swore they would never make IPAs are still making IPAs now.
Right. That's what people want.
Yeah, and like I said, my favorite style is black IPA, but it's a much less common style. And so I thought, I'm just going to make my own, and then I can drink it anytime. I don't have to wait for some brewery to make it. And, as I kept drinking different kinds of craft beer, and I found a lot of other styles like that, like Rauch beer is a really delicious smoky lager that you just don't see very often. And so that became another style in my repertoire.
Very nice. So you said you're in New York for 5 years.
Yep.
So how are you keeping up your connection with Japanese culture and especially, with sake and all that while you're there?
Well, I worked in a Japanese office for this television network, and I was there were never more than 3 people, including myself, who were not American. There were never more than that. So most of the people in our office were Japanese. Most of them spoke only in Japanese all day, every day. And all day, every day. And what?
Mainichi?
Mainichi eats a demo. And the culture was just very Japanese. It felt like being in a Japanese bubble where if we went out for food, it was usually Japanese food. And New York is a great place for authentic Japanese food. And even sake, it's one of the best or one of the few places where you can find a great variety of sake in America.
I think there's a lot of Japanese expats, a lot of Japanese business people going in and out of there anyway. I think especially people in Tokyo, like if they're going to go anywhere in the U.S., it's probably going to be New York. I mean, it's just one of the top places for so many of the industries that they would be in. And if they're going to be a chef, then they're probably going to try and go to New York, maybe LA, but I feel like New York draws so many people from Japan.
Yeah.
So what made you leave New York?
I just couldn't take it anymore. No, I honestly love New York. The industry I was in and the neighborhood I was in didn't feel sustainable. Basically, I loved my job, but I was overworked and underpaid, and there wasn't really any room for career growth with the company. All of my family was back here on the West Coast. So moving back here, I was hopeful that I would find a full-time journalism gig. But I also, between quitting that job and moving out here, fell back on, my old experience throughout high school and college in the hospitality area of, serving and bartending. So I ended up working at a really excellent Japanese izakaya in New York just before moving out here. When the job hunt for a journalism gig in LA wasn't immediately producing results, I started working at another Japanese place out here in the meantime. From there, I found a job for a food and beverage exporter where I was their only in-house Japan expert. So they put me in charge of export sales for Japan. And
which means you were trying to sell American goods to the U.S., correct? Or to the U.S., to Japan, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. Selling food and beverage to Japan. And even during that time, I never quit my serving and bartending gig at the Japanese restaurant, because one's during the day, one's at night, extra income's nice. And I've always loved serving and bartending, and being a part of that industry comes with so many fringe benefits, like, lots of free, delicious food. The food and beverage trade shows that you get to go to are great, and you get advanced looks at new products that haven't reached the market yet, as well as just being able to expand your knowledge and experience with other brands and other labels. So yeah, since that point, I no longer work in export sales. I did that just for a year, but I also took kind of irregular gigs as a sake expert for a Japanese importer and distributor, because at some point living out here in Los Angeles, I had been volunteering at different sake related events, and I came to meet a guy named Toshio Ueno, and he is one of the few master sake sommeliers in I think he's one of two in California, the entire state. And he was the first person to really recognize and identify my knowledge of sake as an expertise. And it had never even dawned on me that was unusual or rare.
It's just a hobby of yours that you liked, and a passion.
Yeah, I was really into it, and I learned a lot about it because I loved it. And because I spoke Japanese, it was easier for me to dive deeper into it and to get answers to questions that maybe a non-Japanese speaking sake enthusiast would have a harder time finding the answers to. So that's why, to bring it all full circle, I like to call myself an accidental expert. But since then, I have gotten certified as a sake specialist, a international kikisakeshi, which is basically what we would call in the West a sake sommelier.
In part two, we'll move into more of the basics of sake, because I think a lot of people maybe have an idea of what it is, but don't even really know how it's prepared.
Yeah.
Just personally, I didn't even realize for the longest time that it was brewed, not made like some other, I was thinking of more along the lines of vodka or tequila.
Yeah.
Where it's closer to beer than it is to liquors.
Yeah, or wine. You're not alone. Basically, I would say 8 out of 10 or 4 out of 5 if you want to reduce it, people that I interact with think that it's either wine, a kind of wine, because it's often translated as rice wine, or that it's distilled. People will say, this is distilled, right? I go, nope, it's brewed. They say, but it's wine? Nope. It's its own thing. So yeah, sake is an OG craft beverage. It is just one of these things that we being human beings, took very seriously and did a small batch with meticulous attention to detail and the fluctuations in flavor and procedure. And we just put a lot of time and effort into experimenting in Japan for the last 1,000+ years. So if that sounds like beer or wine, then you can understand how sake is such a craft beverage.
Thanks for listening to the Drinking Buddies Show. I hope you liked it. Be sure to subscribe and share with your buddies. Check us out at www.thedrinkingbuddyshop.com and connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care and drink well.